Okay, so welcome to the Clark County Amateur Radio Club monthly meeting, online edition. So I kind of kept the slides pretty similar, although this is a little bit more difficult to reach out and find out who is here in attendance, but I would like to welcome the Clark County Aries members and also the IWARN participants or members as well. And if you're a visitor, a new ham, a new club member, if you've gotten a license upgrade or even a certification or award edition, feel free to email me at prez@w7aia.org, and we will make sure that I get you mentioned at the next meeting. Hopefully we can kind of learn some things as we go through this meeting to, do some better enhancements for our next meeting, assuming it's online as well. But welcome very much, or welcome to all the new members and to new visitors as well. Okay, so what we'll start off with is our announcements. And starting off with our announcements, we've got the service event updates. So first of all, thanks to everyone who did volunteer to help out at these events. The 3 events that you see, or the MS Walk has been canceled. The Hazeldale Parade of Bands has been canceled as well. And then the Pomeroy Farms, that has been postponed for now. But again, thank you very much for volunteering. Another option to get on the air and for volunteering is going to be our special event station. There is an online sign up, and this is to celebrate our 90th anniversary. And that'll be at the w7aia.org website, and that is on the home page. And if you see what's been highlighted, if you just scroll down to where it says the CCARC 90th year SES, and then we see where I've circled it in green, that is what you click on if you wish to sign up. It's a great opportunity to get on the air, and then also to help recognize our club's 90th year, which again is a pretty special anniversary for any club, really, to be in operation for that long. And then if you have any special questions, you see at the bottom it says Special Event 2020 at w7aia.org for those questions, and that will go to Tim Coleman. Okay, so social distancing ham style. We're going to try to increase our participation at the IWARN.net, which is Thursdays at 7 every week, and then the Friday Roundtable, which is Friday at 7 every week, except for during when we have our monthly club meetings. And that will be on the club repeaters, the 147.240 and 443.125 with the offset of the 94.8. And we have made an effort, or we are, as a club leadership, we're going to make an effort to have more participation on those as well. So if you have questions, probably more so for the Friday Roundtable, if you have questions or things you'd like to discuss, we should have some pretty good representation there. Let's see, I clicked on some, there we go. Okay, and then on to our feature presentation, Low Orbit Satellite FM and Single Sideband by Dave Churba. And let me see if I can get over to him. Okay, Dave, I believe I've got you presenting.
My share is still not highlighted.
Oh, are you sure you want to switch? So, yes. A little bit of a lag there, I guess.
Yeah, there is. Okay, I'm gonna...
And I will mute myself.
Oh, okay. Steve, can you unmute yourself and let me know if you're seeing my screen or not?
You know what? I see your screen. It's small on mine, though. That might be because I'm still presenting.
No, it says I'm the presenter. We should be good.
No, my PowerPoint was still running. So I'm seeing your entire slide. You're not actually doing a slideshow.
Okay.
So I see PowerPoint application.
All right. So because this is done online, folks, everybody who's listening, if you have a specific question, I have my chat window open, so you can send questions via chat, and I'll address them as we go. Sometimes it may take me a moment to take and see that, but I appreciate all your questions and stuff. So we're going to talk about low Earth orbit satellite operations this evening, and I will stop at a couple points and specifically ask for questions. And I'm sure being the first time we've done this, we're going to have a couple of bumps, and be patient with us, and appreciate all your feedback. So, first of all, although I've been around the club quite a bit, I thought you might be interested in a little bit of my background. I was licensed first in 1989, but I've been interested in ham radio ever since 1967. Some of you may know that I worked in college in the University of Michigan Radiation Lab, and I did research work on microwave radar, holography antennas, and all sorts of transmission line.
Hey, Dave.
Yep.
Sorry. Did you change the slide from your first slide?
I did.
Okay. I think you're presenting your PowerPoint application instead of your slideshow, so I think you want to change your selection. You bet.
Does this look better?
Yep, there you go. My background.
All right, thank you. So, and as part of that research work, I did all sorts of analyzing and designing and building antennas for all different bands. I got started doing the satellite with Oscar 10 and 13, were highly elliptical orbit satellites, and they were a lot different than most of the low orbit satellites that we have today. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Some of you may realize I'm a very avid contester. I do both HF and weak signal contesting, and I have a whole notebook full of certificates and awards, and that's where they stay. I have DXCC 311 countries. Although around here that's not much. We have so many people that are on the honor roll and nearly have all the countries, so it's a great group of people around here for DXing. And I have the equivalent of the DXCC for the VHF and UHF on 6 meters, 2 meters, 1.25, and 70 centimeters. I was the 69th person to get the 1.25 meter VUCC. I designed industrial computers and controls of all types in my career, and then I ran some businesses for about 14 years. And eventually I decided to go back and do a PhD in computer science in 2005 and did bioinformatics research until I retired in 2016. So let's start with a little overview of what lower orbit satellites consist of. The satellites that orbit the Earth between 100 and 1,500 miles above the Earth. That's really actually pretty low compared to some of the other celestial objects. We have two types of satellites in orbit. The FM single-channel satellites, which are probably the easiest to work, but also are more limited. And then the linear transponder satellites, which actually have pass bands of between 20 and 100 kilohertz. And on those satellites, you can work CW and single sideband. And instead of having one channel, it's like any other HF band. You actually have can have a dozen or so people talking at once. Most of the low orbit satellites pass around the Earth about every 90 minutes. And so a typical satellite pass that'll be in range will be 6 times a day out of the 12 to 20 orbits that they do each day. And some satellite passes will be short as 6 minutes and others as long as 25 minutes. And most of the satellites really have mode B and mode J. Mode B and Mode J both use the 2 meter and the 70 centimeter band, and the only difference between those is which one is the uplink and which one is the downlink. So this slide shows a little bit about some of the orbits that we have. And if you see this slide, the low Earth orbits are pretty close to the Earth compared to, like, the GPS satellites are in mid-orbit. And then, of course, like your satellite TVs and stuff, they're in your geosynchronous orbit. The other thing about the different satellite orbits has to do with the how much of an elliptical orbit they are. When I first got started doing the Oscar 10 and 13, they were a highly elliptical orbit, like this one here you see. And so what would happen in those orbits, when the satellites are way out here, where you can see my pointer is, they could actually illuminate almost half the Earth. And so working all different countries on satellite was pretty easy. Now the low orbit satellites aren't nearly as elliptical, and so they're more closer to the Earth, and when they illuminate the part of the Earth with the satellite signals, they're much smaller. Now, we're all concerned with pollution, and so the two diagrams down below, each of those black dots represents a satellite in orbit around the Earth. This picture shows the low orbit, and then this picture shows all the orbits, and so you can see you know, some of the satellites, and there's a lot of black dots on those pictures. If I were in the International Space Station, I would be really concerned about accidentally having one of those hit you, and that could be a very serious impact. Here is, if you're interested in actually looking at some of the stuff that describes the orbits, and there's a lot more to the orbit. Some of the orbits are in daylight, some of them are in synchronous daylight, and so there's a lot of different characteristics to the various satellite orbits. And if you go to this website down here, that'll enumerate all of those, and you can get a lot more information about how the different orbits take place. Now, to show you the difference in the footprint, the height of the satellite, Oscar 7, this shows you the footprint of Oscar 7. And so from this slide, you can see that someone in New York could actually work Africa and Europe using Oscar 7 because they're both in the range at once. Here, on the other hand, is one of the newer satellites called XW-2F, and you see how much smaller that footprint is because it's not nearly as high above the Earth. And so this really limits all the different people you can talk to on the various satellites. This afternoon I worked a couple of people on Oscar 7. I've worked some Soviets on Oscar 7 and some people in Asia, but mostly it's stateside. And I'll talk a little more about Oscar 7 in a little bit. So, a functional block diagram of the two different types of satellites. A single channel, it's like any FM repeater, except for it's like a crossband repeater. It listens on a particular uplink frequency, it gets received, goes through a little repeater controller, and then gets transmitted back down on the downlink frequency. So in this particular case, this is a mode J. Both of these are sort of mode J. If the uplink frequency was 70 centimeters and the downlink frequency was 2 meters, that'd be a mode M. But the thing about the FM single channel repeater is that on those satellites, whoever's got the strongest signal on the uplink frequency, he wins the contest, or she wins the contest, and that's who gets retransmitted. In contrast to the linear transponders, they actually have a passband, and so what happens is you can have multiple signals in here, in here, and in here. You can have multiple signals. They all get mixed with a mixer frequency and then get transmitted out on the transmitter. Now you notice two things. See, this is the low frequency and this is the high frequency. And this is, again, the low frequency and the high frequency. So this shows you how the signal gets transposed or inverted. So this is what we would call an inverting linear transponder. The lower you go in frequency here, the higher you would go in frequency here. And that does cause you have to know which type of transponder it is, whether it's inverting or not inverting, to know how to make the tracking work. But as you can see in this case, you could have a dozen or so different signals in the passband, and so you could have lots of people all working the linear transponder type satellites at the same time. So it's not quite as cutthroat as there is with the FM satellites. In any case, people really good citizens. So on the FM satellites, you got to know when to be quiet and let other people have their shot. And in the case of the linear transponder ones, if someone has a really high or high amplitude signal in one signal, he'll actually steal power from some of the other people. And that's considered bad citizenship, and you can get nasty grams about it. Now let's just go over a couple of terms about the satellites. Doppler shift, most of us remember the train example from high school, but basically the shift in frequency caused by the relative motion of the satellite to the observer. So when the satellite is approaching you, the Doppler shift will artificially push the frequency higher, and as the satellite's going away from you, the frequency will be artificially lower. Because the relative velocity of these satellites is so high, they can actually shift the frequency almost 10 kilohertz on the receiver and the transmitter. So you have to accommodate for the Doppler shift. The uplink is the frequency that you transmit to the satellite on. Downlink is the frequency that you receive the satellite signal. Footprint, as we saw on a couple of slides ago, is the size of the area covered on the Earth, and that really determines who you can talk to on any given satellite. Apogee is when the satellite's the furthest away from the Earth if it's got an elliptical orbit, and perigee is when it's the closest to the Earth. Now, inclination is a little hard to see, but it has to do with the angle at which the satellite path crosses the equator, and that really has a lot to do with how much each satellite path progresses around the Earth. And a Keplerian element is the set of numbers that define a satellite orbit. This is really sort of very interesting math. I know without getting into a lot of the details, but it's all based on something called quaternions, and it has to do with how you model things that are in free space and rotating and stuff like that. And a lot of the math that you use to analyze aircrafts and orbital sciences all use a quaternion math, and it's really a pretty cool way to look at things. A lot of robotics and a lot of computer graphics where you've got animations and stuff, high quality animations like in the movies, they all use quaternion math to model the objects, and it's pretty cool. So let's get to the heart of the matter. What equipment do you need? Well, I'll be honest with you, it's possible to make satellite QSOs with just an HT and an extended rubber duck. I've done it. You have to be pretty lucky to do it. You can't have a lot of people fighting for the resources. And it's not easy to do. And like I said, you really have to be lucky. I used to talk to the Mir space station almost every day with just an HT. It was possible to do. They were on the air a lot. They were bored after they did all their special work. And so I used to have a lot of conversations with them with just an HT. Now, if you want to be good at this, you really need a radio that can do full duplex. In other words, it can receive on 2 meters and transmit on 70 centimeters at the same time. Some of our HTs can do that. Not all of them can. Some of the Kenwood HTs and some of the ICOMs are very good at doing that, and that really does help a lot. Now, so you have a wide range of radios that'll work. A good HT that can do full duplex, you can do the satellite QSOs with that. A mobile rig that'll receive and transmit at the same time is an excellent strategy to do the satellites with. And of course, you have satellite capable rigs, you know, like the new ICOMs and some of the Kenwoods, like the TS2000 I'm going to show you. And I'll tell you, back in the day when I first got started, there were people that had an all-mode 2-meter rig and an all-mode 70-centimeter rig, and they actually did the satellite QSOs using 2 independent all-mode rigs, and they had to be good, because I'll tell you, keeping the Doppler shift and the tracking and all that was pretty tough. A lot of the computer programs were actually set up to handle 2 radios, and so they would do that. Now, I'm sort of an antenna nut, and so when you start looking at doing the satellites, you look at how many different antenna styles. The very popular handheld dual band arrow style antenna with a Yagi, and they've got a duplexer built right into the handle. This is probably the best investment you can make if you're really trying to do satellite QSOs and stuff like that. Now, a lot of people don't want to deal with rotors and moving the antenna, and stationary egg beater antennas actually are optimized to catch most of the satellite paths near the horizon and even directly above. And I'll show you a picture of these in a minute. And then if you want to go full bore and you want to be a real purist about it, you do circularly polarized crossed Yagis or helical antennas, and you have azimuth and elevation rotors so you can track the satellite and be pretty sophisticated about it. If some of you have been to field day, you've seen my setup with the crossed Yagis and the rotor. And like I said, that's back when I got started with the Oscar 10 and 13, you had to do that because the satellites were so far away. You had to have 100-watt brick amplifiers and preamps and stuff, and so that's just the way I got started doing it. And if we had, if the Oscar 40 had actually worked, these would have been very important for working the Oscar 40. So just to prove that you can do this on an HT, here's a QSL card I received from the Mir space station crew back in 1991, and I worked this QSO was with an HT standing in my front yard, and this is a Christmas card they sent. It's a computer generated image of a Christmas tree, and a whole bunch of the cosmonauts signed it, and it was stamped by the official bureau there. So it is possible with just an HT to do a satellite QSO. I just thought I'd throw that in there to show you the proof. So switching over to antennas, here's the Arrow antenna that's very popular. I don't own one, but if I were getting into the satellite antennas for the very satellite QSOs for the first time, this would probably be one of my first investments. And in the handle here, they actually have the duplexer, and I'll talk more about the duplexer in a little bit. Now, here's a M2T's M2 they have two crossed Yagis, circularly polarized. This is pretty high end if you were going to do this. And it shows you, here's the 70 centimeter Yagi, and here's the 2 meter Yagi. And the way they get the cross polarization is they shift the elements by a quarter wave on the boom. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I look at the antennas that I actually use. And here's an example of the egg beater antennas that are by M2, and they show you on the two boom. And these you don't have to rotate at all. You can just set them up fixed. People that were doing the WeFax and a lot of the stuff like that from the satellites early on used a lot of the egg beater antennas, and they have a lot of merit. If you really have a pretty good amplifier and stuff, these will work great. Here's my current satellite antennas that you've seen at field day. This is a new tripod I built that's on the roof of the house, and in this case I get the circular polarization not by shifting the elements a quarter wave, but by using a phasing harness and a relay. You can see here, so I have 4 elements on 2 meters, and I have 11 elements on 70 centimeters crossed to get my circular polarization. And this is the basic equipment I have. Here's my Yaesu elevation and azimuth rotors. And you got to do a little math when you're trying to figure out where to point them. Each of the ticks is a certain amount apart. And here's the TS2000. You can see it's in satellite mode right now. You can see the indicator. And it turns out for this particular satellite, I'm transmitting on 2 meters and I'm receiving on 70 centimeters. And so this is the setup radio that I use quite a bit for that. Now this is how my setup works. I have the TS2000, and the coax runs to the 70 centimeter, and then another coax runs to the 2 meter, so I don't need a duplexer in this setup. And you can see the phasing harnesses and stuff in the plastic bag. I have a PC that I run a program called PCSat32. It's a tracking program. I'll show you a picture of that in a little bit. But what that does is through the serial port, it controls all the Doppler shift and stuff on the TS2000 receiver. So it automatically adjusts both the 2 meter and the 70 centimeter frequency to adjust for that relative velocity of the satellite. Now, I have sitting in my closet a tracker interface that also hooks to this program that will automatically control the rotor. Right now I have the board, but I've never put all the parts in it, and so that's one of those to-do projects that you just never get around to doing, and it's been in my closet since a visit to Dayton many years ago, so that tells you how long I've been procrastinating. If I was going to do this with a mobile, here's your single coax from your mobile. You're going to need a duplexer of some type, and this is a pretty example duplexer. So the one end of the duplexer goes to your 70 centimeter antenna, and the other goes to your 2 meter antenna. Now, if you're going to do the low orbit satellites, you don't really need the circular polarization. When the satellites were further out, they were further out past a number of ionization zones that are around the Earth. One of the things that you learn when you learn about propagation is that if you take any kind of vertically or horizontal wave goes into some of these ionization zones, when they come out, they're circularly polarized. No matter what you do, that ionization and the way the waves go through it, it gets the waves rotating. Now, if your orbits are high, like the Oscar 10 and 13, having that circular polarization was really important because you went through those ionization belts. However, with the low orbit satellites, they go through the ionosphere and they get shifted a little bit, but not nearly as bad as they used to in the high orbit satellites. So, in this case, there's a video here that shows specifically how do you get, it's a really good video, I've got it on the slide, about how to do the low orbit satellite QSOs, especially in the case of the FM satellites and how to go about doing that. And keep in mind, if you had that arrow antenna, it's got the duplexer built right in, and you hook it up to your radio, your handheld or otherwise. Now, this is a cheater sheet that I have for doing the keeping track of which frequencies and stuff like that are existing. Now, Fox Oscar 29 is a Japanese satellite. It's really popular for years and years, but it's having some trouble. So right now it's not on. Now, Oscar 7 is 40 years old. I mean, if you think about that, that's amazing. And it was lost for about 15 years. The battery shorted and just the satellite went dark. And then for some reason the batteries came unshorted, and as a consequence, whenever Oscar 7 is in the sunlight, it's operational still. And I really like it because it's got a much higher orbit, but it's running only on the sunlight. So here you can see the center frequency of the passband, and in this case you can see that it's about 50 kilohertz wide, and the same on the uplink. And you can go listen to beacons on any of these satellites, and typically what happens when you go through one of those mixers on the linear transponders, you send lower sideband up, and when it comes down, because of the way the linear transponders work, it's upper sideband. So this is just some notes that you can see. Now, I've been spending a lot of time working these XW satellites, XW2A, B, C, D. I believe D may not be operational, but E and F. And these satellites are really nice. Their passbands are only about 20 kilohertz wide, not very big, but at the same time you can actually have a dozen or so QSOs going on them, and they're all the same mode B. You transmit up on 70 centimeters and you receive down on 2 meters. And then here are a couple of other satellites. I've actually done quite a bit on the CAS 4A and 4B satellites. They're really good satellites. I have listened to these, but I've never actually worked them. And here are some of the FM satellites. So here are the frequencies for the FM satellites. AO85 is very active. I've talked to my nephew a number of times on AO92. It's an FM satellite, and you have to turn on a PL tone to get those to work. And the other thing too, and I'll talk more about how you program these into an HT or a mobile rig, because of the Doppler shift. You need to do a couple things to get things to work properly on the receive side of things. The International Space Station, they have FM capability. They have a packet repeater on it. I was part of a school project many years ago where we talked to the space station. There's a lot of issues when they do get on. So many people try to work them. It's just a madhouse. It's worse than some of the DX pileups. And so unless you got a special schedule for a school or something like that, working the ISS voice is pretty tough. But they do have a packet repeater on and some stuff like that. So when you do the basic operation of a satellite, you really need three hands. You got to have one hand controlling the rotor, one hand dealing with the Doppler shift, and another hand to write down who it is you're talking to. So if you're going to work the FM satellites, the easiest thing to do is to program 3 to 6 consecutive crossband memories on your rig, whether it's an HT or a mobile rig. And so what you do is on the first memory location, you put in the 2-meter frequency, and then you adjust for the Doppler shift by 10 kilohertz for the 70 centimeter frequency. And then the next one you adjust the 70 centimeter by 5, and then the third one you adjust it by 0, and then you do 2 more for when the satellite's going away from you. That way, all you have to do is sort of twist the knob to go from memory to memory when you're in the middle of making the QSO. Now, the linear transponders, they're a lot more tricky because what you can do is you can set up your rig so you're transmitting on the one frequency and listening on the other, and you can actually send some CW, and you can adjust the Doppler and the offset to do that. Now, in my case, what I do is I have the Doppler already being adjusted by my computer program, but even still you may have to adjust your frequency 300 or 400 and stuff like that. Now, the best thing to do when you're first getting started is just to listen to the satellite passes. Don't try to talk, just listen to them, get a feel for what's going on, and learn how to move your antenna. And then adjust your Doppler. If you're using an HT or a mobile, just click the channels. And if you have a full-blown UHF, VHF rig capable of satellite tracking, you do that. And then, after you've listened for a few passes, you go ahead and you actually start making some QSOs. Now, I have some audio here from a Oscar 92 satellite pass. And I'm going to go ahead and play this a little bit so everybody can get a feel for what a QSO pass actually sounds like. Let's see if it'll work now. All right.
I got you. Give me your grid. The grid is Delta Flight 72. USL? USL TN86 here. 73. Alpha Charlie 9 Echo. Here's Kilo Delta 6 in November. Foxtrot Delta is Delta Mike 04. Kilo Delta 6, November, Foxtrot Delta, Alpha Charlie 9 Echo, Delta Mike 72, USL? I've got your Delta Mike 72, please copy Delta Mike 04, thank you, 73. Roger, 73. 88 BT1, BTY, and 6RSX, 13. FLG CN86. KC6 FLG, here's Kilo Delta 6, November Fox Delta, Delta Mike 04. And your grid again, please. Charlie, November 86, I copied you DM04, 73, CN86. Thanks for CN86, 73.
So, that gives you some really nice behavior. A lot of times the satellite passes aren't nice and neat, and everybody doesn't always take their time. They step on one another. But that gives you an idea of how quick you got to be. You got to know what you're going to say and when you're going to say it. And you can see that, like with that pass that I was playing, you can make quite a few contacts in a 10 or 15 minute actual window if you pay attention. Now, just to show you what one of these satellites look like, this is one of the small CubeSats, the XW-2E, when it was in testing phase. And I always get a kick out of these yo-yo ruler antennas that they have on the satellites. They've been used extensively for years, and that's really what they are, is literally the yo-yo antennas, just like you could make some of the cheap 2-meter beams and stuff out of for direction finding. So this gives you an idea what it looks like with the solar cells on the outside and the antennas and stuff like that. It's actually pretty good. So almost all the exchanges are your call sign and your grid square. So it's important to know what your grid square is. And that's really, sometimes if there's no one on the satellite, you have a more extensive conversation. But for the most part, they're pretty brief. Just your call sign and your grid squares. Now, you don't have to have a satellite tracking program. You can go on to the AMSAT page. In this case, I punched in Oscar 92, and I asked it to predict the next 10 passes. And this shows you that on April the 3rd at 4:22 UTC, here was a pass that was going to last about 8 minutes and had a max elevation of 66 degrees. So that's a really good pass. And you can see it came up over the horizon at about 100 degrees, and it's going to set when it's about 11 degrees. So using this kind of information and the aero antenna, you can figure out, using a compass and whatnot. You notice that to get this pass, I had to put in my grid square. So I plunked in Charlie Nancy 85 Papa Romeo, hit the calculate position, and then did the prediction. And it'll predict the passes for you. And this here's the website you can go to on the amsat.org. What's really cool to do is if we have a clear night out, you can actually do these predictions like for the International Space Station. And even if you don't want to use your radio and stuff, you can actually look in the sky when it's clear, and you can see the International Space Station. It'll be like a star, but it'll be fairly bright and moving fairly fast. And you can actually watch the satellites go through the night sky just by the naked eye. It's actually pretty cool if you're ever out. Not that we get a lot of clear nights here in Washington, but if you ever have one, it's a pretty cool thing to do, to set out and look for the satellites. Now, this is the kind of satellite tracking program I use. You can buy it through the AMSAT organization. It's actually developed by a bunch of guys in Germany, and it's well worth the $100 or $60 or whatever it costs. I've had this one for years, and I recently updated it. This shows you the footprint of the Oscar 7 pass here. You can see it says Oscar 7. You notice how it's calculating the Doppler shift for me. So it's actually adjusting the 70 centimeter uplink frequency by 4 kilohertz, and it's adjusting the downlink frequency by minus 1.48 kilohertz. And remember, that minus is because of the inverting transponder and how that works. This area here shows you the footprint of the satellite. This little mark here shows you where we are in Washington. So you can see I can talk a better part of the United States, even into Mexico, and I can even talk to Russia on this. Any place this area is highlighted means that someone with a station could be talking to the satellite, and I should be able to hear them. Down here it gives me the azimuth and elevation, so I know how to move my rotor control to position it. This gives you an idea that the satellite is 2,000 miles away. it's pretty amazing line of sight. 5 watts can go 1,000 miles. The attenuation is just the spread of the radio waves, and you know, even at 1,000 miles you have a path loss of only about 80 decibels. So even 5 watts and a standard receiver can actually be received and heard direct line of sight. This particular setup I've got the map centered on my location. I had to go up into the setup program here and set up my radio so this program would talk to my radio, and it actually takes these frequencies and directly manipulates my VFOs on the radio to actually have these frequencies. Over here are some toolbars. If I want to go side CW, I just click this and it switches my radio mode to CW, so I can hit the Morse code key and I can hear myself. When you're running the FM satellites, the Doppler shift isn't nearly as important. It does some of it, but not as much. And down here you can see what Kepler elements I'm working with. At the time I took this snapshot, I didn't have everything set up correctly, and I was using some really old Keplerian elements, and as a consequence the satellites weren't where I thought they were, and I since fixed that since I took the screen snapshot. So it's really pretty cool. I have, in this particular setup right now, I have about 12 satellites. It turns out that the satellite number B is Oscar 7, but I have like the International Space Station. If I were to click on I, it would show you that. And so you can have multiple satellites in there at once, and you can see when they're coming up on the horizon. This is part of the program, and I use this for field day. So what it allows you to do is for all the satellites that you have in your setup, it'll predict when the passes are going to be. And so, for example, I ran this back at, these are European because they were developed by Germans. So it's day, month, and year. And so April the 2nd, AO7 was overhead, had a max elevation of 52. It came up over the horizon at about 178 degrees, and it set at 340. And then this gave me the local time at which it came up. So it came up at about 4:25 in the afternoon, and it set about 20 minutes later. And so these are all the satellite passes that are up for the next day or so. And so I can sort of figure out what I'm going to do. You know, you spend a lot of time sitting around waiting for the satellite passes. But this is a really easy way to do this for a whole bunch of satellites. You can do the free stuff one satellite at a time and figure it out. But this program is really nice as part of what I do to work the satellites. Now, this is a status page that ANSAT has up. And the reason I say this is nothing is worse than sitting there waiting, trying to work a satellite, only to find out that it's not operational. So, example, if we look here for Fox Oscar 29, you see how these red marks? These indicate that people weren't being successful with the Japanese satellite at all. On the other hand, up here, Oscar 7, it sometimes switches modes, but you look, even among the red, there are 3 reports, there's 1 report, there's 3 reports of people actually making QSOs on Oscar 7, which, considering it rose from the dead after 15 years of being out of service, is just absolutely amazing. And you can see the mode A and the mode B. It has 2 modes there. And they both operate when the satellite's in the sun. Here's Oscar 92, probably the most popular. It has 2 modes that it operates, but the UV mode, mode B, you can see here that it's pretty active, nice and blue all the time. And all the XW satellites, you see the XW-2C, that doesn't look like a happy picture. There's no reports and a lot of red. So that one's out of service. And you can see 2E, it has some issues as well. But 2A, 2B, and 2F are very active, and I've made QSOs on all of those. I've also worked the CAS 4A and 4B satellites quite a bit. You can see the Saudi Sat, the 50, it's still in operation, but they're being really stingy. They turn it off when it's over the United States and turn it back on when it's over the Middle East. So that's a little bit. And so you can see that I tried to capture most of the more accurate ones. If you want to go check the satellite status, here's the link to do that, and you can go and check that. Nothing's more frustrating than to be sitting there waiting for an Oscar 7 pass, only to find out that it's not operating because it wasn't in the sun enough. Now, everything's not done till the paperwork's complete. You want to log your QSOs on Logbook of the World. Logging them from some of the other programs like N1MM, it's an absolute nightmare to try to put a satellite QSO in it. So what I do is, it turns out that if you go to your Logbook of the World, you can make your own ADF file, and when you do that, you can set it up properly. So you can say, all right, here's the satellite. You specify what satellite it is. You can set the frequencies, who you worked, and the date and the time you worked them, and you can set up a file like that using Logbook of the World. And here's a tutorial that tells you all about how to do the Logbook of the World with the satellites, and that's the way to do that. Some of the other programs that are out there, some of the various, like, I can't think of the name right away, but some of the more popular rig managing programs do have facilities in them for doing the satellite QSOs, but I've ended up doing that. So, like for field day, what I had to do is I had to sit down with Logbook of the World, and I had to put all of these QSOs in and make an ADF file that then I could submit to the ARRL and send off to Charles, where we could get it into our account for the club. Now, I throw this picture up of my nephew. This is Chris, Alpha Alpha 8, Charlie Hotel. Turns out that there's a grid square that's almost entirely in the middle of Lake Superior back in Michigan. So what he does is he paddles out in his kayak using one of the aero antennas in his HT, and he puts that grid on the air for everybody because it's a very rare grid. And you can see here's his GPS. You can see he's just over the grid marker, and so he's sitting out there making satellite QSOs. So that you really want to talk about being portable, this is the way to do that. So, satellite operation overview. If you're persistent, a very modest setup can work a satellite using all the free tools found on the web. Using a simple handheld radio with an aero-style antenna and a built-in duplexer will make it a very reliable. You can make a lot of satellite QSOs, especially on Oscar 92 and those. The key is understanding the paths of the mechanics, the Doppler shift coming and going, where the antenna needs to be pointed, and the operating style. You got to think quick. It's your call sign and your grid square, because nothing's worse than to have try to work some guy and he can't get your grid square, or he doesn't give you his grid square, or he tells you that it's sunny wherever he is, and all you want to do is complete the QSO. So you really need to be good. A lot of times you only have a 15-minute pass, and of that 15-minute pass, you may only have 5 minutes that are really workable, so you have to be quick. A lot of the people have taken to using your recorder on your phone, and they'll record the satellite pass on the phone, so that way you don't have to worry about writing it down. So instead of needing 3 hands, you only need 2 hands. You got your call sign and your grid square, and then you can keep track of the satellite name, the date and the time and stuff till you put it in the Logbook of the World. A lot of the rigs out there these days handle the all-mode VHF and UHF, like the Yaesu 817s, the new 9700s, ICOM, and they can work the linear satellites with just some homebrew antennas and do a great job of it. There are lots of homebrew antennas designs on the web. You don't need to suit the circularly polarized. You only need to do that if you're working satellites that are out past the Van Allen belt. The Van Allen belt, that's the thing that really turns the circularly polarized waves. So if you are just working the low orbit satellites, just a Yagi for 70 centimeters and 2 meters will work. So you can actually do that. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to open it up to questions. If you want to ask me a question, use your chat to type it in. I see Steve has popped in there, and he's told everybody that the Arrow antenna is about $159, and that if you go with the crossboom Yagis like the M squared, it's about $638. The rotor is almost that much, so that's $1,000 if you were to add the two together. So I'll sort of answer that questions. Steve asked a question about a particular type of orbit. I have to go research that, Steve. There are lots of different styles of orbits. Most of the low orbit satellites that we work are in a progressive, they sort of shoot up towards the polar orbit. They flip over like that. I can't remember exactly what that type of orbit is, Steve, so I don't know. Any other questions? Go ahead and send me there on the chat, and we can try to answer them. Yes, I like Oscar 10 a lot. Oscar 10 crashed into the Earth. Andy asked, are verticals good? You know, vertical antennas, you can work the satellites with them. So if you have like a good dual band GP7 or GP9, you can work the satellites pretty easy with that. I've done that a lot. The only thing is when that satellite is overhead, the vertical antennas don't work very well. So you're going to be, you'll be good when the satellite's on the horizon approaching you. When it goes overhead, you won't be able to work it. But then as it's going away from you again, the vertical antennas will work good. Before I put my satellite antennas up, I used to use my VHF beams that I use for weak signal, and I just point them where the satellite's coming up over the horizon, and I could work the satellites just fine. When the satellite got high in the sky, I couldn't. Any recommendations to build a duplexer? There are really good duplexer designs on the web. I noticed today that there were a whole bunch of them that people were showing. A simple printed circuit board with a half a dozen components would be a sufficient duplexer for 10 watts or even 20 watts. So if you were using an HT or a mobile rig on low power, they would work. The duplexers, you'd have to go search on the web, or I could go look for one. But they were, they're very easy to build out there. You're not going to build a duplexer for 100 watts unless you go and you buy a good kit with the toroids and stuff like that. But that's a great question there from Joe. Any other questions? Well, I guess if there's no other questions, I want to turn it back over to Steve, maybe. Steve, unmute yourself so we can close out the meeting. And,
so I'll try to switch presenter.
Okay. I don't know if I have to do that or you can. We had a total of 64 people at this peak, I think. So that was a great attendance from everybody, and I really appreciate everyone giving it a try.
Yeah, it was a great job on that presentation as well. Looks like Greg said 68. Must have been the high.
All right.
Now I'm seeing a switch presenter option, and I'm selecting that it's not doing anything, so you might try switching presenter to me also.
I'm going to do that. I'm going to stop presenting.
Let's see.
I had to click my yes.
Okay. Here we go.
Oh, I might add that these slides are, Gary's already put them up on the website, or will have them up on the website. The only thing about the slides, if you do the PDF, it doesn't work, but if you do the PowerPoint, the sound clip does work, so I might add that. Anyway, go ahead and take it away, Steve.
Okay. Well, are you able to see my slide?
Yep, I sure can.
Okay. All right. So I'd just like to thank Dave for stepping forward and offering to present this presentation. Really appreciate it. I did forget to mention, so that the HamWen presentation that was scheduled when we went to the online format, it wasn't going to be a good option for the presenter, and so Dave stepped forward to offer this. So again, really appreciate that. So to everyone who is in attendance, if you have any thoughts on our online format, or if you have any questions at all, feel free to email vp@w7aia.org. That'll get you to Jeff Hildebrand, N7TCV, and or prez@w7aia.org, and that'll get to me, Steve Gilhausen, Alpha India 7 Alpha. And otherwise, good night, and I guess there is no need to help clean up. The next meeting will be Friday, May 1st, and I believe that it will be listed on our website, and we should get an email blast as to what our format will be, whether it's in person or online again, and that will be following that email blast that went out already. I'll stick around for an extra 10 minutes or so if anybody has any questions and we just want to chat. Feel free to, well, actually, and I will stop the recording and do the unmute. So again, thank you for, if you're not hanging around, thank you very much for coming and trying out new things with us.
All right, and I'm here as well, so I'd be glad to answer any other questions and stuff, and appreciate it.